Before we get into today's stories, visit dreadsarmy.com to sign up for the Dread Weekly newsletter so you don't miss out on any updates. Also, check out all of the channels in the Dread Network on dreadsarmy.com or in the description below. Thanks for listening. Now let's get to the stories. What's your hobby? Personally, I've had a lot of them over the years, and sometimes it feels like I pick out a new one each summer. 3 years ago, it was kayaking. 2 years ago, I had a stint as a passionate birdwatcher. Don't ask me why, I must have been going through something. But last year's hobby is the hobby I want to talk about. Last year, along the same river, I often kayaked in the days past. I found a set of footprints. They were strange enough that I made a little mold and brought them home with me. I think for a lot of my friends, seeing those feet displayed on my coffee table was a little alarming. At first, you see, they just looked like the prints of any human. When I explained where I saw them, I sounded more like a kook than a curious adventurer. And that's what I was. I was curious and I set on a path of adventure. It all sounded so friendly and fun and fascinating back then. The feet were too big. That's what made them special. They were larger than any human's feet could possibly be. I did the research. Maybe there have been a few historical exceptions, but I didn't imagine that some giant had casually strolled barefoot through my area. They belonged to something else then. You see where I'm going with this, don't you? Anyway, that brings me to my most recent hobby. Last summer, I was a monster hunter. The prints became my hyperfixation. I took pictures of them and compared them to other findings online. I returned to the riverbed and searched for more evidence of whatever creature had left them. For a long time, I didn't have any luck. I found similar prints online, sure, but what did that prove? It certainly didn't rally any of my friends to my cause. No one suddenly approved of my fascination. In fact, the people around me were all begging me to move on to my next hobby. There was a limit to how often they wanted to hear about feet, I suppose, and I can't blame them. Looking back, I should have listened. They didn't know it, but they were warning me at the time. If I had moved on to something else, I wouldn't have gotten myself into so much trouble. I returned to the river with a renewed sense of purpose. The season was ending, and I wanted to be able to hoist something above my head that proved my fixation was justified. Did I know what that something would be? Absolutely not. So I did exactly as I'd done before. I combed the mud for more prints. At least a second discovery would prove that the first one wasn't a fluke. This time, I found them. I found the prints and the feet and the monster they were attached to. And I wished at that moment that I'd stuck to the bird watching. I didn't even notice it at first. The hulking mass was so large, squatting down by the river, that I couldn't recognize it as a living thing. My peripherals told me it was a stone, a boulder. Then it moved. It stood upright and erect. A stream of water ran from its large mouth and dribbled down its chest, sticking to the thick brown fur that covered its body. I'd never felt so small. Sure enough, it was a giant. And sure enough, looking down to the massive feet that sunk into the mud, it was the monster I'd been hunting for. Now that it was in my sights, I didn't know what to do. I froze and it turned, and all at once I realized I was cornered. Behind me was a forest of trees and brush that I knew I couldn't navigate quickly. The creature's legs were long and powerful. It would catch me in no time at all. I was lucky, I guess, that when it turned, it wasn't snarling. It didn't meet my gaze and roar. It didn't charge my position and leave the imprint of my corpse alongside its footprints. It could have. I could see the rippling musculature, even through its thick coat. I could see in the scars on its face, its strangely ape-like face, that it had fought and survived things a lot tougher than me. It stared. It heaved, letting out a mighty breath, and then it walked away. It crossed the river. The water only reached its chest at depths that I could have been swept away. It crossed and disappeared into the trees on the other side. Still, I was frozen. Something startled me out of the shock, I guess. I was safe after all, and I was facing what could have been my last chance at documenting my encounter. I didn't get any pictures of the beast, but I could still capture its prints. That was all I needed to begin with, right? Surely photographs of fresher impressions would confirm all of the theories I'd thrown around with my friends. I took the pictures. I sent them out. I had a dozen more late-night conversations, confessing my encounter and everything I'd felt that moment. I went into meticulous detail, ensuring that my friends would be able to visualize exactly what I'd seen. And none of them believed me. That's the other edge of this sword, isn't it? Even if you've discovered the truth, even if you found the proof to back it up, that doesn't mean the claims aren't outlandish. That doesn't mean anyone else is going to let that truth invade their beliefs and change how they view the world. None of my friends wanted to believe in the monster I saw. I can't blame them. I still think about that encounter sometimes. I still have nightmares imagining the 100 other ways that moment could have gone. I still ramble about the creature when I've had too many drinks. I still prefer the birds. For as long as I can remember, I've been tirelessly working for something. In high school, I wanted to get into a good university, so my grades and extracurriculars were top priority. Then it was all about working on my degree so I could get a good job. I put everything I had into my career. Not to brag, but it definitely paid off. I now enjoy a highly respected position in my field and a decent spread of achievements. But I was missing something. I couldn't tell you the last time I took some time for myself. I don't know if I've actually taken a real break in the last 2 decades. I decided to change that. I wanted to do something life-changing and completely unrelated to work. So I planned a solo road trip around the southwestern United States. I packed a suitcase, cashed in my PTO, and just started driving. It was the freest I've felt in years. I hit all the major cities, saw the sights, and experienced the beauty of nature along the way. I had planned out a path ahead of time, including where I would sleep each night. It was a mix of hotels, Airbnbs, and host families who let travelers like me stay in their houses. It was amazing, but there was one weird thing that I noticed. I mean, it didn't bother me at the time. Even now, it might be just a coincidence, but in light of what ended up happening, I can't help but read into it too much. When I was in the populated areas, cities, suburbs, cute little towns, everyone was, well, as you'd expect. Clerks, receptionists, everyone who dealt with people on a regular basis were friendly and polite. But in the more rural desert areas, the people started seeming, I'm not really sure what the right word is, a bit frigid maybe. They were abnormally curt and seemed like they wanted nothing more than for me to get out of there, away from them. They just all kept to themselves. I didn't feel welcomed at all. And again, maybe I'm just paranoid. But now I wonder if they had secrets they didn't want a stranger to find out. Anyway, I didn't let the lack of warmth take away from my trip. This trip wasn't about making friends. So as long as they got their money and I got my bed, I was content. About halfway through the trip, I was fully in the desert for a couple days. I had arranged to stay a night at an Airbnb. It was an adorable little house with a lot of solitude. The nearest town was a couple miles away. This was my first Airbnb on the trip. I had spent all previous nights at least around other people, either the hosts whose houses I crashed at, or the staff and fellow guests at the hotels. This would be my first solo night. I was honestly very excited. I'd have a nice house all to myself with no traffic noises or city lights. Just the stars and the desert and me. When I got there, I settled right in. I watched the sun go down and the stars come out. Without the light pollution of the city, the view was incredible. It got chilly at night, so I made myself some hot chocolate and curled up with a blanket and a movie. Soon I fell asleep. Everything was great. Then something strange happened. I woke up quite suddenly in the middle of the night, and no matter what I did, I could not get back to sleep. I tried everything I could think of. I think that somehow my body must have sensed that something was amiss. I know this will sound cliché, but the air honestly felt, I don't know. I believe charged is the word. I just know everything felt sort of tense, like a scene in a movie when you know something is about to happen. At the time, I just assumed I was just nervous about the trip, especially since this whole Airbnb thing was a first. I decided some fresh air would be good to clear my head. I remember looking up at the stars and being floored all over again. I know it shouldn't be possible, but I'm certain they were even brighter and more beautiful than before. Almost unnaturally so. I was only outside for a couple minutes before I saw a shooting star. I was thrilled. I had never seen one before in person, only in movies. But then I saw another. And just when I was thinking about how lucky that was, I saw a third shooting star. Then a fourth, fifth, sixth. Unbelievable. I couldn't believe my eyes or my luck. I was over the moon. But the shooting stars didn't stop. They just kept coming and coming. And then things got even stranger. Instead of going straight down into the horizon like normal, the stars started looping around. Soon the sky was filled with them. They just come out of the darkness, fall down, then fly back around, away from the earth. At this point, I realized those were not stars. I didn't know what they were, but even a city slicker like me knew that shooting stars don't do that. Okay, I know this part will sound insane, but please know that I'm not crazy. I'm sure I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen it myself, but, well, I did see it. The stars, well, the lights, kept looping around the sky. They came in tighter and tighter until they had formed a giant glowing circle, spinning in the sky. The circle suddenly turned bright blue. It lit up the entire sky like lightning, but it was more than just a quick flash. Even now, I can still see that image of the entire desert glowing blue. I don't know how long it stayed there. I don't know how long I stayed watching it. It was like time just stopped. Then there was a loud cracking noise. It was sharp like a branch breaking, but as loud as thunder. The lights immediately went out. I woke up late the next morning. My alarm had been snoozed several times, but I had no memory of doing it. I didn't remember getting into bed that night either. What I did remember was the events of that night. My memories of the bizarre lights are extremely vivid. Even now, it feels like just yesterday. I never told anyone. Like I said before, my career is my life, and I hold an important position in my field. I can't risk anyone thinking I'm crazy. I just had to get this story off my chest. That night still haunts me. I'm not even sure if I want to know the truth about what I saw, but hopefully now I'll be able to have peace. Well, my story isn't long. I firmly stand by what I experienced that day, back in May 1999. During this time, I was looking around scouting areas for the best turkey hunting. There's a specific area in the mountain range around me, where I know lots of wild turkeys like to congregate and come together. But to get there, you have to go through a lot of thick brush and timber. There is an old logging road that will take you a few miles up, and then from there, it's about another 3 miles on foot, all through thick, dense forest. Not a problem since I'm pretty much raised and born in the woods. But on this day, in May 1999, on my way to that spot in question, I was attacked by some upright canine walking on its 2 hind legs, and I'm still not exactly sure what it was. Luckily for me, I came out unharmed as I did not allow it to get close enough to do any real damage. I shot off a ton of rounds, but I think I only scared it off because it retreated and sounded like more were following after me. So part of me thinks that it was an ambush or some sort of trap, like they knew I was there and they were getting ready, calculating the perfect time to ambush me and take me down. I can't prove that theory, but from the noises that I heard after this thing took off, there was more of them around me, surrounding me, coming towards me. That was more than enough proof in my mind that I needed to get out of there and leave. Besides the fact that I was just attacked by some unknown canine, that I'm not sure where it came from or what it was, nor have I ever seen it in my life before. Before I jump into the actual description of the account itself, I'm going to lay this flat out. I don't normally listen to horror stories or watch horror movies. I don't believe in vampires, werewolves, monsters, zombies, ghosts. None of that. I like to think that real life doesn't contain any of those fictional things. But since this happened to me, I feel like my mind and the possibilities have been opened a little more. After I got out of my truck, I was parked in this old logging road. And remember, I'm out here in the middle of nowhere. There's not a soul around for at least 10 miles. I can remember some of these details very well because the entire account stands so strong in my brain. I want to say I probably wasn't even 200 yards of the trail from my truck when the entire woods around me went deathly silent. Now that only means one thing. There's a large predator in the area, and all the wildlife knows it. That means no birds, no squirrels chirping and chattering. That's what I expected, which is exactly why I kept a firearm on me. My thoughts at the time were a mountain lion, and mountain lions can be known to attack people, especially given the right circumstances of them being hungry and you being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And while it wasn't exactly a mountain lion, it was something much, much worse. I still refused to lay down and die that day. I was going to hold my ground no matter what. I didn't care if it was a giant. So where I was on the trail was a very gradual incline. It probably started off at the base of the road, right where my truck is. You walk across the logging road and it's a very, very gradual incline, probably 500, 600 yards before reaching the top of a ridge. Then it's a very gradual decline and then flattens out after a while. You take this for about another couple miles and it drops down again into almost a little valley, if you want to call it that. It's a very large clearing with a small little creek, and if you follow it, which I have done before, it feeds into a larger river that runs through the entire area. So when the woods around me went deathly silent, it was instantly noticeable. I was still able to turn around from my position and clearly see my truck, and also turn around from there and clearly see the top of the ridge that I was walking to. Once the woods became quiet, I became aware. Acute senses kept me alert of everything going on. I continued my pace, keeping my hand on my gun. I made it probably about another 100 yards, maybe more, when I started to hear movement off to my right. At first, it sounded like something moving around like a small animal. Nothing to be concerned about immediately, but it went from rustling to a thrashing sound, as if something big was throwing itself all around in the brush. And keep in mind, this was May, so everything was freshly lush and grown back from winter time. I kept my focus on the right of me, but still continuing my pace. Not exactly sure what was going on, thinking perhaps a mountain lion was about to pounce on me, but I wasn't exactly sure. Then I make it about another 60 yards and up the trail for me, probably about another 50 to 100 yards. Only about another 100 yards up from the top of the ridge. If that's not confusing, out jumps this canine on its hind legs, out onto the trail. The trail, by the way, is a game trail that's been used a lot in the past, but it's pretty overgrown and worn out, leaving just enough room for me to travel through without thick, crazy brush blocking my way. I want to say there was maybe 2 feet of total clearance on both sides of me. And right as this thing jumps out, I'm already keeping my attention to the noises on my right, and also keeping ahead of me, trying to be extremely alert and in tune to everything surrounding me. When this thing jumps out in front of me, it looks right at me, and that's what made me stop dead in my tracks. At this point, my hand was already on my gun, and I knew instinctively, just from being out in the woods enough, that this was no natural creature, and this thing meant danger. Nothing can replicate the look that it gave me. It was in no way a look of imminent surprise. It was a look like it was telling me, "You shouldn't be here and now. I'm going to make you pay." This thing probably stopped and stared at me for 1 minute. I don't even know if it was able to size me up in that time, but it immediately began turning into a runner stance like a runner does, and starts jogging toward me on 2 legs, arms outreached and mouth open. As if it's going to grab me, I immediately don't even hesitate. I pull out my gun and start firing. It probably makes it within, I want to say 20 to 30 yards from me, after I've already fired several rounds, and jumps off into the left side of me, running 90 degrees from me. Now this thing is running like a bulldozer through the woods, screaming, the loudest horrific noise I've ever heard, and is going perpendicular away from me in the woods. Meanwhile, there's also noise still on my right. That's getting louder and louder, and after several more seconds goes by, and the screaming of that thing that I shot gets quieter and quieter, the noises around me began to come alive. That's when I began to hear thick thrashing from not only my right, but to my 5 o'clock, my 2 o'clock, and my 7 o'clock, all sounding like they're getting closer and closer to me. Now, I truly felt that feeling of imminent danger, and that I needed to get out of there now if I wanted to live. So very calmly, I turned around, but also keeping my eyes around me 360 degrees. I quickly made my way back down the trail, the several 100 yards I'd already walked, making sure to keep pace and keep track of everything around me. The noise and the thrashing continued and followed me all the way down to the end of the game trail, where it connects to the old logging road. As I was roughly within 50 yards of the logging road and only another 20 from the truck, I began to hear that screaming sound coming back, heading right towards me from the diagonal angle in the woods. I assumed it to be the same canine bipedal creature that I had shot at just moments previously. It sounded like it was pissed, and it was coming down the ridge on a diagonal, coming towards me and the truck. I knew at this point I had to double time it, or there wasn't going to be any of me left. I had no idea what I was dealing with. This is some advanced, unknown, large predator. I made it back into my truck, flew in, pulled the car in gear, and drove out of there quicker than I could have. I probably drove so fast. I think I nearly bent my axle driving over some of the rocks of the old, crappy logging road. I mean, after all, there were a lot of rocks that you had to be careful. Driving in, I was probably doing about 10 or 20 miles an hour. These were really large rocks, but driving out of there, I want to say I was probably doing close to 40, maybe more. Trying to preserve my life was far more important. There were points where I could hear the rocks grinding against my front axle, and I was just praying to God that it did not do any damage to my truck. Luckily, I made it down the logging road and back to one of the more main roads. I can't tell you if the noises ceased once I got in my truck. I didn't have my windows rolled down, and I was not looking back. I did not want to risk that thing bursting out of the woods, coming to pull me out of my truck and take me away. But if that's what it was doing, it had missed me by a very short amount. As far as the other noises that were going crazy in the woods near me, I'm not sure. The noise around me erupted as if these things were now signaled to come and ambush me and get closer. Even though I described to you the sounds as thrashing around and rustling, they became louder and louder, not only in volume, but in distance. I truly believe that this thing did not act alone. And as soon as this thing was shot and ran off, the other 3 or 4 that were surrounding me were beginning to move in. Had I stood there any longer or pursued the ridgeline, which is what I was originally heading for, I think they would have pounced on me and tore me limb from limb. And judging by the appearance of what I saw, this thing looked clearly like a half-man, half-wolf hybrid that looked very comfortable, walking on 2 legs with large hands, or what appeared to be hands and long black claws at the end of each fingertip, which if I had to guess would measure anywhere between 6 to 8 inches in length. And they were pretty thick. The hands resembled that of a raccoon hand. The chest had a large patch of fur on it. Although these creatures, or the creature I saw, had long fur all over its body, and the head had a huge lion's mane, except it was more resembling of a wolf. And the eyes and the face were very much animalistic, except around the eyes and the brow ridge, which were more humanoid. But the few things that really stand out to me as truly disturbing, besides its facial expressions and its sheer intelligence and power and speed, were its teeth and its eyes. As soon as it opened its mouth and charged towards me, this thing had an unnatural number of teeth unlike any predator should have. I want you to think for a second. Imagine a shark, and how a shark's mouth is full of razor teeth. They're not large teeth per se, but there's a bunch of tiny ones that are razor sharp. That's kind of how this thing was. They weren't literal shark teeth, but this thing's mouth was overloaded with them, tiny and little daggers that I could clearly see from the distance that I was. I can't even imagine how they look up close. I did not want to see that. It looked to be way too many teeth for its mouth and its eyes. Its eyes appeared to be a very soft orange that did not glow or give off any light, but they had such a fierceness to them that was almost striking just from looking at them. I have a cousin who's a very, very good illustrator, and I've thought many times about sitting down with him and having him illustrate what I saw that day. I'm sure he could bring it to life just going by my descriptions, since the image of this thing will forever be burned in my mind. Feel free to ask me any questions. I'm happy to answer any of them. Thank you. I had a solo winter camping trip planned. I know it sounds like a crazy thing to do, but winter camping can be pretty fun if you are prepared for the weather. Plus, I had gotten some new camping gear for Christmas, and I just couldn't wait until summer to try it out. I was no stranger to winter camping, but it had been a while since I had my four-season tent out. I had organized to head to a hike-in campsite at local state forest lands, about 5 miles from the access road. The trails weren't groomed that time of year, so I had to snowshoe in. It was pretty tiring, but the one nice thing about winter camping is you can haul all your gear in on a sled. So, no backpacks are needed. There were no other cars in the parking area, and there were no signs of any other campers. Of course, this isn't unusual in the dead of winter, since there are not that many people who like camping when temperatures get below freezing. I finally got settled into my campsite, and after packing down enough snow to set up the tent, things started to look pretty nice. According to the map, there was an easy snowshoeing trail nearby, along a scenic river that I was excited to get to the following morning. It's not unusual for the forest to be a bit quieter in the winter. Snow muffles sound. And yet, I hadn't noticed any wildlife on my hike in. I didn't think it was too strange at the time, but looking back, there was definitely something wrong right from the get-go. I had just started to boil some water to cook dinner when I heard something flying overhead. A shadow passed by, but I couldn't see what it was coming from. But I could tell that it was big, maybe an eagle or a great horned owl. I tried to find it but didn't see where it went. My campsite was surrounded by trees, so it didn't feel unusual to see a large bird around. The rest of the evening was uneventful. I settled in for the night and was toasty warm in my sleeping bag. I was just about to drift off to sleep when I heard a strange sound. Well, the sound itself wasn't strange, but it was the location. It was the sound of a bird flapping its wings, but it sounded like it was just outside the tent. I got my headlamp out and started to unzip the tent to chase whatever it was away. I didn't see anything immediately, so I slipped on my boots and stepped just out of the tent to look around. I didn't want to spend much time outside since it was getting cold. I pointed my light towards the forest. I didn't see anything in the trees, but something reflected back off the light, closer to the ground. There was no mistaking it. They were eyes. I didn't see the creature when I first looked, because it was standing between the trees. The only thing that gave it away was its eyes. If you didn't look close enough, it looked like maybe the outline of a small tree standing amongst the others. But it wasn't. I could now see that it looked like the dark outline of a man, but with wings. The eyes were about level with mine. I knew it wasn't human because our eyes don't reflect light like that. This looked like the reflection you see when you shine a light on a cat at night. It was staring directly at me, but it didn't move. I screamed at it, hoping that would scare it off, but it just stood there motionless and staring back at me. I didn't have any weapons on me except a small utility knife, and was now starting to worry about protecting myself if need be. Maybe I could bludgeon the thing with my fuel canister. I don't know. I couldn't hike out of there until the morning. Plus, I would have to walk right past the creature in order to leave. I didn't want to just go back into my tent, because then I wouldn't be able to see what it was doing. But there really wasn't a better option since I wasn't all geared up to be out in the cold. So that's what I ended up doing. I laid there awake all night, but the creature didn't bother me again. I looked for signs of it in the morning as I was packing up camp. There were no tracks anywhere, but I did find an assortment of small animal bones, organized into a ring around where my campfire had been. I'm not great at identifying bones, but I would guess they were maybe raccoon or fox-sized. After seeing that, didn't stick around to look for anything else. I packed my gear in record time and booked it out of there. As I was leaving, I heard the sound of wings again, but again I didn't see the creature, and I didn't stay to look for it either. I don't have any explanation for any of it. I never told my friends or family. Nobody would believe I saw some birdman creature in the forest. There isn't a great ending to this story. I never figured out what the beast wanted or what the assortment of bones meant. It didn't exactly try to harm me, and it knew where I was that entire night. So I figure that if it had wanted me dead, I would be dead. I don't know if I trespassed on its territory or set up camp right where it lives, or what. I can say for certain that I'm never going back there. So if it was trying to scare me off, it did a damn good job.